It's time for the Ward Scott Files, hosted by John Martin. Join the Salty Dog and his captain, Ted Yoho. Search for the Ward Scott Files on Facebook, Vimeo, and over 30 audio platforms, including Apple and Spotify. Now here's your host, the Salty Dog, John Martin.
Well, good morning. Welcome to our Pirate Podcast here with yours truly, the old Salty Dog, John Martin, and my dear friend, former Congressman and captain of our pirate ship, Captain Ted Yoho. Good morning,
sir. Good morning there, John. How you doing on this great Friday?
I am truly blessed, my friend, truly blessed.
Truly blessed. That's a good way to be.
Well, I didn't get a chance really to talk to you about it, Ted, but yesterday I went to a May Day celebration protest. I'm not sure
you did that. God bless you.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw my video, but I shot about a 30-minute video of my interactions with people there, man on the street kind of things. Very similar to what we did when we went about a month ago, you and I together.
Right.
At the Tesla dealership. Couple of big differences in this one. One, there were a lot more people there in general. There was no counter demonstration, no like pro America, pro Trump. It was billed as a May Day on Facebook, billed as a May Day celebration of the Communist Party of Gainesville.
God bless.
And before I go any further, if people actually want to watch it, wherever you're looking at this broadcast now, whatever Facebook page, it's posted on our 3 Facebook pages now, so people can check it out. But I couldn't really find anybody who could describe to me what it was about from a side of communism. And but it was clearly anti-Trump. That was very clear. And I guess these protests were going on, or demonstrations all over the country. A few things of note to me was, one, as I said, the crowd was pretty big. As you know, Ted, I'm what I call myself a warrior, but a happy warrior. And so I was just letting people speak for themselves. The crowd wasn't that diverse, though. It was mostly a bunch of old gray-haired people like me, old hippies, basically.
I saw that.
Old hippies.
Noticed that.
And, of course, University of Florida is going through graduation. I did interview one graduate literally in his cap and gown there. But there weren't a lot of, the east side of Gainesville, where we were, is one of the oldest black neighborhoods in that general area in Gainesville. Yet there were very few people, I hate to use the word of color, but that's what the term is, other than a few maybe Hispanics, a few people pushing the Palestinian agenda. But there weren't a lot of young people, and there weren't a lot of African-American people there. So I'm wondering really just how meaningful this is as far as elections go in the direction of our country or whatnot. And you watched some of the video. What were your thoughts on what you saw?
Well, I looked at that, and I think they're outliers. You can't discount them. It's kind of like the AOC and the Bernies. They're appealing to the outliers. They're not the mainstream people. Yes, they're getting large crowds like you saw in Gainesville. It was a larger crowd than you saw with the Tesla rally, anti-Tesla, anti-Elon Trump, and those kind of rallies. But what are they selling? They're selling division. They're selling collectivism, which is Marxism and communism. They're selling government control pretty much of everything. And they ought to be thankful that they're in America, that they can protest like this and hold rallies, because you can't do this in other countries. The ones that they're espousing the ideologies of that they really want, you can't do that in those countries. So it's kind of crazy. And that's why I say they're outliers, because mainstream people have rejected this, and we need to educate the people, as you're doing, and get them to understand what these people are really rallying for and that's for a demise of the United States of America and our constitutional republic. And it's funny that they go on bitching, complaining, and moaning about our country, how bad it is, yet they couldn't do this in a country that they're wanting to develop.
Yeah, they really didn't have any solutions, which I find is kind of the issue with the left a lot. And what was kind of a couple of other things that were kind of interesting to me about it was, one, that the signs, which I tried to get a pretty good view of them, literally everything that Donald Trump has done in his first 100 days. And there's probably at least 100 things. I'm certainly not going to go through all of that, but they literally had a sign against Donald Trump for whatever it was, and Elon Musk and everything else. But they really weren't, I couldn't really get anybody to articulate to me what they were actually for.
Right.
And, there's always people like that. I guess they've been around forever. My dad used to talk about it, that, people will come and they'll tell you what they're against, which is basically everything, but you can never find out what they're actually for. And so there's no real solutions in it.
There's not. And if you go back to Trump's, I guess, State of the Union address he did, he pointed that out. He goes, no matter what I do, what I say, you can have the best outcome. This side will never applaud or stand up or agree. Could be about America. And I think that's really is, the attitude of the modern day socialist Democratic Party. And I use socialist sparingly and nicely to them because I think they're more Marxist.
Yeah. Well, just before we came on the air, I was watching a live stream that Fox puts out, this live stream channel, and it was over in Geneva, Switzerland, and they were having a quote report from the UN about what's happening in Gaza. And while I was watching it, this woman was articulating extremely well. I don't know about her fact, but she was talking about the struggles of the people in Gaza. And I was thinking to myself while I was watching, she's a very attractive, very articulate young woman and passionate, no doubt about it. But I was thinking, if you were actually under Hamas rule, you wouldn't even be able to be seen, let alone be active. You'd probably have a veil over your face. And some of the things you're saying, you might even be killed for. And so you mentioned about the people the reason I brought that up is because you mentioned about what they were doing yesterday and apparently all over the country. They couldn't do it anywhere else, really. And a lot of the things that they're for, if they really had communist rule, do you really think China, we saw what China did back in Tiananmen Square, literally put the tanks on people and stuff like that. So I think people forget that the freedoms they enjoy here to express themselves, and I certainly encourage it, as I did yesterday, they can only do that in a Western civilization, and there would be no Western civilization without the United States of America. So it just baffles me how they don't see that.
It really is. It takes me back to when I was running for Congress. I was working on this lady's horse, and she goes, "Ted, I know you're running for Congress." She goes, "But I can't support you." And I'm a very liberal Democrat. And I said, I hope you could support me for a season, because what I'm fighting for is to preserve our constitutional principles, the amendments that give us freedom of speech and all the choices we have in this country. I said, it's not about being a Republican or a Democrat. It's about being an American, protecting those principles that have given us this country. And I says, if you don't believe that, go to Cuba and speak out against the Castro regime at the time. Go to China and speak out against Xi Jinping, or go to Iran and speak out against the Ayatollah. I says, you won't be able to, and you won't come back. And I said, those are the things that allow us to have what we have in this country. And neither party owns them, but they're all American ideology. They're void of a party. And again, that's where the people need a wake-up call in today's society, because number one, we become spoiled as a nation. You can turn on a faucet, water comes out, you flip a light switch, light comes on. We have no wants really when it comes down to, the bare necessities. And yet people are complaining how bad it is in this country. And there needs to be a wake-up call, and let's just hope they can come to it on their own versus a crisis. That always brings us together.
Well, I appreciate that. And I just want to remind people, if they're just tuning in, we're talking about a May Day, quote, celebration, if you will. It was basically an anti-Trump rally. They held them all over the United States, but I filmed one in Gainesville. And you can check it out by going to one of our Facebook sites, wherever you're seeing this particular broadcast.
They're going on all over the nation, and it's something that continually festers. It doesn't go away. It just festers. And, times like this, when they don't have somebody they like in the White House. The interesting thing, John, is they sit there and tell you all the things bad that Trump is doing. He's tearing down the democracy. He's tearing down the Constitution and all this. These are all the things they use as deflection because they do it when they're in power. But when it's the other side, oh, how bad it is. But if they're doing it, it's acceptable on their side when they're tearing the very structures that have held this country together. It's very hypocritical, and that's why they're not in power.
Yeah, well, sometimes some of these super liberals, progressives, ought to go back and watch like that movie, Dr. Zhivago, which is a great, great movie.
Well, you're dangerous.
Because like Trotsky was a hero of the, the Communist Party and what became the Soviet Union. But people forget that he was one of the first people they shot once they actually came into power. So a lot of these liberal people, I used to tell them all the time, you do realize that you'd be the first one shot if your dream actually came true, because I have friends of mine that are like super liberal and speak out against government. Well, that wouldn't be allowed. So I tell people, watch the movie.
That's funny you brought it up because I've spoken about that. You got your Pelosi's and the Schumers and all the elite Democrats that are pushing all these crazy liberal ideas and open the borders and all that. And as soon as they become in power, it's exactly like you said, the Pelosi's, the Schumers, they're going to be eliminated immediately.
Yeah, they'd be the first ones lined up, and I don't understand why they don't see that. Well, we'll move on. There was a story that broke yesterday. It's kind of got a couple of parts to it, and that was that President Trump announced that National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, and in case people don't know who I'm talking about, most will, but Mike Waltz, a former congressman that I believe you served with, did you not, Ted?
I served with him. He's my congressman in my district. I was in his district.
That's true. And, he was the one caught up, in lack of a better word, Signalgate, that whole thing. And so he has, I don't know exactly the details of whether he resigned or Trump asked him to step down, but he stepped down as advisor, National Security Advisor. Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, is temporarily going to take on both roles. But then after all that kind of came out, President Trump announced that Mr. Waltz is nominated now for the UN.
Our ambassador to the UN,
ambassador to UN. And so he's going to have to go through a confirmation and all that, which makes it interesting, to say the least. What are your thoughts on all that? What do you think happened? How do you see this going? Was it any of it surprising to you?
No, I kind of saw this coming. As soon as that story broke a couple of weeks ago, this was a misstep by somebody in Waltz's team, whether it was intentional or not, it was a misstep. And at that level of play, at that level of engagement, you can't afford to have any missteps in the National Security Advisor position. You got to be spot on. That's the protection of our nation. He's the one advising the president. And it's just shoddy work or a lack of oversight for allowing somebody to put that journalist's name in there. And, I think this is going to spill over into Hegseth and the Secretary of Defense, too.
Yeah, well, one of the things that struck me when he announced after the initial decision that Mr. Waltz, Mike Waltz, is going to be the ambassador to the UN, is my question. I'm not questioning his ability to do that job, but does this extend the story? By having him go through a Senate conference, the Democrats are going to make hay on this. Some Republicans probably will too, and certainly the media. I'm wondering if this doesn't just extend that story.
I think it
Whereas
does.
If he just left, it might put it to bed. I don't know.
Right. And my understanding is, since he was confirmed as national security advisor, he doesn't automatically get it approved for the UN ambassador. He's got to go through that process again. And I think it'll definitely add fodder to the fire. I mean, there'll be fuel to that. And I think it's just something that might be better just to say goodbye and let him retire to greener pastures. I like Mike. Mike's a very talented person, very knowledgeable, but this was a big misstep that I think will hound him the rest of his career if he stays in government with the Trump administration.
Yeah, no doubt about it. But so one thing we know for sure, if anybody can handle two jobs at once, it would be Secretary of State, former Senator of Florida, Marco Rubio. I got to tell you, Ted, I just been amazed at the job that Marco Rubio is doing. I've always had kind of a mixed feeling about Marco because I thought a little bit he was too much of a establishment guy at one time when he was trying to run for president. But I got to give credit where credit is due. He has done a marvelous job from what I can see.
He has. Marco's done a good job. And, it's a tough role. I mean, you're in the Trump White House with a very strong personality. And Marco is going against some of his long thought out traditional feelings, especially when it comes to foreign policy. He supported many of those programs that went away with USAID. There's some very effective and efficient programs that he had to go against, and he's getting bashed by Republicans in the House and Democrats in the Senate and on both sides of the aisle. And these are programs he supported, like PEPFAR, which is the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief that was started under George Bush in 2004, I think it was. And it's credited with saving over 25 million lives. It's the largest humanitarian program on the planet ever. And it's a U.S. program, very successful. And Marco's been a big supporter of that. And they cut it, but then they kept it going somewhat. And there's other programs like that too, that I know goes against his grain, but he's serving a president, and it is a tough position, and he wears a lot of hats, and I think he's doing a good job.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're going to take a brief commercial break, please, sure. And we'll be back after that. Please support our sponsors. And as I always say, if you'd like to become a sponsor, look at the little tagline you'll see at the bottom of your screen that says Contact Freddie.
We would appreciate it. And we would enjoy you on the show to promote your business.
Absolutely.
Although the owner of Lewis Oil Company maintains she is 29, Lewis Oil turns 60 years old in June. Chevron would like to recognize the North Florida second-generation family-owned business, celebrating its growth and staying power. Lewis Oil Company maintains significant on-hand supplies, strategically located fuel depots, a delivery fleet, on-site service, fuel card locks, and convenience stores. Lewis Oil Company understands its responsibility in the local economy by providing service and delivery on demand and in crisis. As a first responder for 18 Florida counties and the Southeast from Texas to Virginia, we are proud of this rare accomplishment. Lewis Oil delivers.
This is Ward Scott, and I want to thank all our sponsors who keep the show going and pay the bills. The Ward Scott Files premium sponsors are Crime Prevention Security Systems, large enough to serve you, small enough to care.
Meldon Law, the only official injury partner of the Florida Gators.
The Ward Scott Files Gold sponsors are Lewis Oil Company,
Shoot GTR,
On the Spot Dry Cleaners, R&R Construction, and Style Cuts. If you are interested in promoting your business on the show, you can visit our website, www.wardscottfiles.com, and click on the Advertise Here banner on the right side of the page, or call my friend Freddie at 352-284-3733. Again, thank you to all the great businesses that support the Ward Scott Files. And remember, if you like the show, thank our sponsors and support the businesses that support us.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. May God have mercy on your soul.
Ward, that very much surprises me that you've never been tased.
You can't handle the truth.
all bees poop.
A warthog. He's going to come up the steps. Here he comes. Oh my goodness, and he's huge. Hello, boy. Wonder if we can pet him. Hi, boy.
Can we touch him? No, don't.
Help me! Help! Help!
And we're back. So welcome to our Pirate Podcast, hosted by yours truly, John Martin, and the captain of our ship, former Congressman Captain Ted Yoho.
Appreciate it. And before we go further, you know, the Ward Scott file that we've taken hold of, the WSF file, you know, you remember how Ward would do his rain dance, his naked rain dance? And we
need one now.
And I didn't need to see it, but we sure need Ward doing one up there and bring some rain down to this area. It is dry. And
well, maybe Ted, you might be the candidate for that. I'll film it.
We'll audition, see who has the best results.
I'm surprised some of them didn't get naked at that event I was at yesterday. I guess they're too old for that now. But
God,
yeah, you're right though, man. We do need some rain here. If you're listening, dear Lord, we need some rain. I got a kind of a hodgepodge of stories here I want to get to, not in a particular order, but this one is pretty big. It broke, I guess it was Tuesday, that Ukraine has signed this mineral deal with the United States. You know, people may recall that when President Zelensky was in the Oval Office, I guess a couple of months ago now, there was it didn't go well, let's put it that way. And so there's been kind of a divide between the administration of the Trump administration and Zelensky and all that. But then, of course, at the Pope's funeral, they had a very famous now meeting of the minds, I suppose, and they've signed that deal. What are your thoughts on that, Ted?
You know, I think it's a good thing. There's mixed blessings in there because now we've signed a deal to mine and refine rare earth minerals in the country of Ukraine that is under attack by Russia. And keep in mind, Vladimir Putin thinks Ukraine is part of Russia. And so now we're going to have investments. We're going to have American businesses going in there. And we've done this in the Middle East with American interests. And if you remember, a lot of the skirmishes and wars we had over there were to protect American interests. So does this invite us closer to those kind of conflicts? Keep in mind what's going on over there. The NATO forces outside of the U.S. are putting in, I read a report last night and today, between $1 and $2 trillion in the industrial complex over there to create all these war machines. And they're lining them up on the eastern border of NATO. And Russia is lining up on their side near their western borders, which butts up to the NATO nations. They're lining up military, they're building barracks, they're putting in equipment, and they're putting in people. They're recruiting over 40,000 soldiers a month. And so they're gearing up for this. So now we're involved in Ukraine in mining. Is Putin going to allow that to be mined and taken out of there because he thinks it's his territory? So it's going to be interesting. It's a bold move, and I would prefer to mine our minerals here in other areas. But if it'll bring, I guess, a modicum of peace over there, I think it would be a good thing. We'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, I saw a report yesterday that we actually have an operation going, a joint operation going with Estonia right now to protect that waterway over there because the Chinese and the Russians are clandestine using not their actual warships, but other ships to potentially damage the underground infrastructure there, which are underwater infrastructure, which is cable, communications and oil and all of that kind of stuff. So we've got an ongoing presence over in that general area right now for sure, not counting just NATO.
Well, we do. And you brought up a great point there because if you look at the play of the world, on a normal day, is anybody trying to take over Russia? Is anybody trying to take over China? Is anybody trying to take over North Korea or Iran? No Western nation is trying to invade into any of these. But yet you see Russia they went into Georgia, they went into Crimea. Now they've attacked Ukraine. China is always pushing the boundaries, and they're using their Coast Guard, they're using their fishing fleets to intimidate these other nations. China is going into the Galapagos Islands, raping the fisheries down there, destroying the reefs. They've destroyed over 5,000 acres of reefs in the South China Sea. And these are the aggressors, but yet they're saying, well, they've got to do this because they feel threatened by us. No Western nation is trying to attack any of these countries. And this is where the danger is because these countries are on the march forward. They're building the war machines. These are the things that really, when it comes down to it, that rally in Gainesville, the May Day rally, those things are going on, but those aren't the things we really need to worry about as a nation. We need to worry about our debt, national security, adversaries such as China and Russia and Iran and South Korea or North Korea now. And this is where we really ought to put our focuses, and this is where our leaders should put their focuses. And this is why, with Mike Waltz, with that misstep, we can't afford to have missteps at this time in our nation's history with what's going on in the world.
I agree with you 100%. But I want people to keep in mind, because, President gets accused, I think falsely so, of coddling to Putin and all of the nasty stuff they say about that. And I wonder what your thoughts on this are. The one thing I think people, it's just my opinion, that people have to keep in mind is that there's going to be no peace in Ukraine without Russia deciding they want peace, because let's face the facts. Ukraine cannot defeat Russia, and Russia, can go on and on and on. I'm not defending them in any way, but the President Trump, is in a precarious position because if Russia doesn't agree to basically end the conflict, there is no end to the conflict. And I think people think we can force them to do it. We can't really. I'm not saying we don't put pressure, but if they don't want peace, and I'll shut up, then there will be no peace.
There will. You're absolutely right on that. And I think this, again, if you go back to Trump, I think this was a misstep on his part when he says, I will have a peace deal within 24 hours. That war will come to an end. And I'm like, that's a pretty bold statement, and it's not going to happen. So you lose face. The United States loses face. And Putin becomes emboldened by that, but not just him. Xi Jinping becomes emboldened because he's looking, well, the Americans are a paper tiger. If I move on Taiwan, as I did on Hong Kong, nobody's going to do anything. And this is where the diplomacy that Rubio understands very well, and Waltz does too. We can't afford any missteps in this because Putin will not back down. Trump thought that he could schmooze Putin onto his side and that everything would be, we'd get along and we'd help each other build economies. When you have people like Xi Jinping and Putin, and you got to throw in Kim Jong-un now, who's becoming more powerful, their goal, especially China, is to take over the world. They want to be the lone superpower of the world. They're working with Russia and North Korea right now to help them accomplish that goal. But their goal is to take over the world. Russia's goal is the same thing. They want to be the number one superpower. So you have these competing forces that are joining to bring us down and the Western allies, in Europe. And Putin will not rest until he accomplishes that goal. And it's naive to think that you're going to bring him to the table over a mineral deal in Ukraine. And as you said, and I think you're spot on, Putin will stop fighting when Putin decides to stop fighting, or he's eliminated by somebody in his country.
Yeah, it's one thing that's kind of precarious about that, when you mention it right there, kind of, is that, and the only way Putin is going to stop is if he either thinks it's in his best interest or he feels personally threatened by the powers within Russia. Then he might stop. But other than that, he's going to keep going, and it just makes the thing pretty tough.
Yeah, no, it does. It's a very touchy situation. And again, when you see Europe, the European nations building up, not only them, but Japan is building up. They went from after the World War II, their military complex went away, and they could only have humanitarian and defensive forces. Now they've developed first strike capabilities, so they're gearing up too. So you've got all these nations starting to do that, and India is on the same track. So let's just hope calmer minds prevail. We're in a tenuous situation, John, that you and I have never seen in our lifetime.
Well, and I don't have a lot of details on it, but you mentioned about India. I did see a report coming out of Pakistan that they had said they have evidence that India is about to launch an offensive against them. You hear that stuff all the time. There's a skirmish line there that they take turns hitting each other, and China for that matter with it.
China too, yeah, right up there.
So it is a shaky. It reminds me, as I've said, more of the start of World War I almost than World War II, where there's just so many fires burning that any one thing could touch it all off. And I really feel we're in that kind of situation.
We really are. Then you throw in South America. You got Venezuela, you have Cuba, you have all these competing forces, and you got Iran, China, Russia components in that area down there in South America and Latin America. So we're kind of surrounded by these people, and it's going to be a trying next 5-10 years. Every indication or every report I read says there's going to be a war within 5 years, maybe 10 years, but they said it's coming. I mean, I'd hate to think of that with what the arsenals people have and the tools, the mass weapons of destruction. What would happen? What's the future generations going to look like? And this is where strong leadership is important, and that Trump needs to get this right. Walk softly, carry big stick. Peace through strength, and we have got to show the strength, but we have to do it in a diplomatic mode to where people don't want to mess with you, and we don't want to mess with them. We want you to have a prosperous life for you and your people, but don't ever threaten us.
Yeah, and what might be the scariest thing out there is the number one thing trending on the internet yesterday. I don't know if you probably didn't see this, but the number one thing trending on the internet yesterday was, could 100 men beat one gorilla? That was the number one thing trending on the internet. Could 100 men beat one big silverback gorilla? So I don't know how serious the majority of the world has taken this, but that's part of our job.
That's the distraction. That's people get distracted because this other stuff is not fun to think about, but you've got to prepare for that.
It's crazy, man. But a couple of little quick topics here. One was Tuesday, actually marked President Trump's 100th day. And of course, on our Monday show, by the way, if you're just tuning in, we do our show live on Mondays and Fridays from 9 to 10. And on Monday, we talked about Trump's 100 days, but his official 100th day was Tuesday. And he held a big rally in Michigan that day. And I want to talk a little bit about that. But one of the things he did right before the rally is sparking some news even today. He went to a military base there, and because it's one that they've talked about closing or shuttering or whatever, but now he's using it as potentially the center of this potential Iron Dome he's talking about building. So kind of revitalizing it. Well, I don't know if you saw this, Ted, but in the crowd was Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan. Of course, we know she covered her face up, in the Oval Office about a month ago or so. But she was in the crowd, and President Trump, man, spotted her in the crowd, called her out, and invited her to come up and address the crowd. Well, how could she possibly say no to that in her defense to a certain extent? But she went on, and apparently she got hammered again for that. Well, yesterday she was on one of the podcasts that Obama bros do, and she basically just blasted Trump, talking about the constitutional crisis and everything else. But so I don't know if you wanted to comment on that, but Trump's rally in general was tremendously successful.
Well, this is where he shines. I mean, he's in his element doing that. He's an entertainer. when it comes to those kind of things. And he's very effective at that. He's very good at rallies. He's very good at energizing the crowds, and people love him for that. And that's what he has done. And that's why, you go back to 2020 election, there was no way he got beat in that. I mean, I'm not going to say that word because I don't want us banned, but, he energizes people. They're behind him. They love him, what he's doing. They may not agree with everything, but they like somebody that's willing to get up there and take some risks. And, you can't expect Governor Whitmer to do anything else. She's got to bash him, and they've got to show that hate. And the constitutional crisis, give me a break. I've never seen the Constitution torn up so much as the previous administration, the Obama administration. And you look at the Clintons, the garbage they did with Whitewater and the Uranium One, where we sold.
You're under attack. It's all good.
To chime in on it, and so I lost my train of thought there, so I want to turn it back over to you.
Well, those dogs, they probably got mixed feelings about having a vet there.
That's right.
They love you on the one hand and kind of look over their shoulder on the other. But
the one's already been neutered, so I can't do it again.
But they might have the shadow memory of it, so to speak. But another person that kind of reemerged this week and had, I wouldn't call it a rally. Well, buy me back up real quick on the Trump rally, just so people know how big it was. They said the crowd was roughly about 70,000. I was watching the live stream of it, and it showed how many people were watching just that particular live stream, and it was north of 100,000. So Trump has still got quite the draw. But a lady who might have some draw, I don't know if you saw this or not, but Kamala reemerged this week. She spoke at what they call the Emerge Banquet, which apparently Emerge is a group she was instrumental in founding back when she ran for a DA locally out there. And it's supposed to, I don't know what this word empower really means, but empowers women to run for office. Well, she spoke at this banquet in San Francisco, of all places. And did you happen to watch any of that? See, I do things so you don't have to. That's
I painfully watched that. That was it brought right back to why I'm so happy she's not president.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw people putting stuff up on Facebook, and I think I chimed in on it on a couple of our sites where when Trump marked his 100 days, we also marked 100 days safe from Kamala being president. That was probably one of the biggest things. But you think about it, if nothing else, Donald Trump kept Hillary Clinton out and kept Kamala Harris out. That enough is reason why, to be glad.
He really, he's earned his face on Mount Rushmore.
Absolutely. Well, during the speech that she gave, she wasn't so much word salad as she really just didn't say anything, to be honest with you. But she did a little part that we're going to play here about telling the audience what she'd been thinking, because she said everybody wants to know what I've been doing and what I've been thinking, and she literally said this is what she's been thinking about. Let's play that.
Weeks ago, the one of the elephants at the San Diego Zoo during the earthquake. Google it if you've not seen it. So that scene has been on my mind. Everybody's asking me what you've been thinking about these days. Well, so in the video, for those who haven't seen it, here those elephants were. And as soon as they felt the earth shaking beneath their feet, they got in a circle and stood next to each other to protect the most vulnerable. Think about it. What a powerful metaphor. Because we know those who try to incite fear are most effective when they divide and conquer, when they separate the herd, when they try to make everyone think.
And just think, that lady could have been the president and may still be. Who knows? She's probably going to run president of the United States.
I hope so.
What do you think about all that, Ted?
it's a great reminder why we're so thankful that she's not in the White House, and that, as you brought up during the video playing, that we need to thank President Trump for keeping Clinton out, Hillary Clinton, and Kamala Harris out. I mean, that would have been a disaster.
Yeah, that, if nothing else, like you said, that should put President Trump on Mount Rushmore, just keeping those two out of there. Well, I want to play this video that she was referring to. What she was talking about was, I guess it's been 2 or 3 weeks ago now, there was a earthquake that was centered around the San Diego area, and it had an impact, and it's a pretty cool video, I'll give her that, about these elephants that she was talking about. So I thought people, if they hadn't seen it, might want to see what she's referring to. Check this out. Well, watch here. There's no sound to this video. Watch here. These elephants are forming a protective circle. Now, the ground is shaking. You can't really see it too much on this, but the camera itself was shaking. You can stop that. That is absolutely a cool video, no question about it. But I got to thinking about it when I watched it again, and what Kamala was talking about, that's what's been on her mind. That has she forgotten that elephants are a Republican mascot? And I was thinking that that's actually kind of what happened to her campaign. The country was those elephants, and they rallied around to protect the country, the foundation of it. That's kind of how the voters, because if you think about it, it was a herd of people that voted for Donald Trump. It wasn't just old white dudes like you and me, Ted.
Yeah, no, and that's an amazing video, because that shows you what eons of evolution has done. The innate instincts that are passed on from one generation to the next in the elephants, they feel that. And this is true throughout the animal kingdom. When there's those kind of disasters getting ready to happen, animals know how to respond to it. Humans don't. Because you've got all these different political philosophies, instead of teaching people the very basics in life. It goes back to our education and critical thinking, but it's a great illustration of the Republican elephant coming together,
around and together,
their herd or their troops. And unlike the mascot of the Democrats.
Yeah, the Democrat Party is not the elephants. I believe that they're the donkeys, and I think we've got one of your favorite pictures memes we can post up there if we get a chance.
Killing me here, John. You're killing me.
AOC, the donkey. Anyway, we can move on without the picture, but there it is. There it is. Thank you, our producer in the background, Zach. We don't thank him enough. Appreciate you, sir.
Somebody sent me a year or two ago, and I says, the only difference is that one of those creatures in that picture knows they're an ass. The other one doesn't have a clue.
I hear you. Well, the big question about the Kamala coming back out is she going to run for governor or president or something? I think if she can find a way to make a bunch of money outside of that, she might not. But I heard one pundit talking about her speech, and he said the fact that she didn't mention anything about California that's actually happening in California was a sign to him that if she's going to run, it's going to be for president. I don't know how much stock to put in that, but I do believe that if she finds a way to make money like the Obamas were making outside of being in the White House, she probably won't try it again. But any thoughts on any of that?
Well, a couple of things. One is there's so much hatred against Trump. She got beat by him. There's a hatred for him, and she doesn't like what's going on. So she's young enough where I think she could run again, and I hope she does. And picks AOC as her running mate or something like that. Because again, what are they promoting? They're promoting the divisional politics that made them lose. They're, running against Trump's attack on our Constitution. He's the only president that we've had that's really stood up for it and fighting the way he is for all the amendments, but especially the first 10 amendments. And, you know, it's just, the Democrats are great at recycling people. Look how many times that Joe Biden was recycled, or Hillary Clinton. And that you would think they learned their lesson by bringing back these recycled candidates that go on and lose their party. And I know that probably goes into our next topic, right, with James Carville?
Yeah. And I'll just remind people of something real quick, that Kamala's doing some type of fundraiser for the Democratic Party in New York within the next week or so, one of those high dollar ones. And I saw yesterday, I don't know, it might be today, but sometime this week or next week, Mr. Biden is going to be on The View. That should be fodder for a show probably right there. But, you know, we've been talking in previous shows about this kind of civil war, if you will, in the Democratic Party. And I came across an interesting video. It's actually the whole thing is about a 45-minute show, and it was a podcast that featured James Carville and David Hogg. You know, they've been going back and forth, but it was pretty interesting. I want to play you about a minute of it, because what Carville is talking about, he's still miffed about this idea of David Hogg raising $20 million to go against primary Democrats in safe districts. Let's check it out, and we'll come back and talk about it real quick.
Yeah, I think, let me be very specific. I think it is abominable that an official of a political party who is being paid or supported by that political party to go out and raise money to defeat members of the same party. I think that's a jackassery of the highest level.
James, can you tell me
if you want to beat Republicans, of which of course lefties never do, they never even run against them. That's one thing. I'm not into beating Democrats. I'm into beating Republicans.
James, I would say, first of all, I am not paid to be a vice chair. The vice chair role is not a paid role at all. Okay. It's a volunteer role. Okay. What I would also say to that is that I think it's possible for us to do two things at once. We do, at my organization, Leaders We Deserve, support challenging Republicans that are in very vulnerable seats. And last cycle, we helped to break the majority for Democrats to have a one-seat majority in the Virginia state legislature by spending $100,000 to do that. We spent $100,000 to support the candidate who broke the supermajority in North Carolina. We spent $1 million on frontline races that were critical to helping break majorities in states around the country, and also reduce the size of Republican majorities that they have there, even if they did.
And there you have it. And as I say, you know, I watch things so other people don't have to, but if you want to watch something kind of interesting, look at that whole video. It's probably 45 minutes long. It was interesting to hear the back and forth between David Hogg and Carville. And, you know, I looked at a lot of the comments, and I'll talk about that in just a second, that people made on the video. But it was pretty interesting, didn't you think, Ted?
It really is, because it shows the mindset of the new Democrats, the younger generations. I mean, he's probably 10 years younger than AOC. And you listen to what he's saying, and he tells James Carville, you're not going to beat Republicans with these lame blank Democrats. And he's missing, well, and I'm glad he's missing this point. We shouldn't say it because I don't want him to know it. It's their policies that are losing the Democrats. You know, it's not the Republicans. We are beating them, but it's not because of their old guard. It's because of their policies are anti-American policies. They're anti-constitutional policies. They're just going in the wrong way. And again, you know, we talked about this on Monday, that AOC and the likes of David Hogg and these other people are the Democrat Socialists of America, which is a communist organization. They're in line with the Communist Party out of Finland and all these other ones. And the guy that started that or revitalized that in the 70s, I think his last name is Karen. He said that all communists are socialists until they move on and get what they want, and then they're communists. And David Hogg, he could be a communist moving forward, acting to be a socialist until they get control, then they're communists.
Well, you know, when you were talking, Ted, there, you were mentioning about the policies versus the message. and I don't think I've ever really articulated this to you, but what really threw me over the top to leave the Democratic Party was after the Al Gore race and all. That's the last time I was actually involved in the Democratic Party. And I used to be on the Democratic Executive Committee. But when they were talking, I was no fan of Al Gore, but when they were talking about the election afterward at the local DEC meeting in Gainesville, they were talking about the messaging. They basically didn't talk about what the message was and what the policies. If they could just get the message right, craft the message right, they could win. And I brought up a couple of things, issues about the economy and stuff like that, and they didn't want to hear it. It was all about the messaging. And that's still what I hear, and you just alluded to it, and I agree with you. That's still the problem with the Democratic Party, is they think it has to do with the message and not the policy.
Right. And see, Obama was good at that because he put his arm around people, you know, metaphorically saying, hey, listen, these guys are trying to take this away from you. I'm going to work to protect you. And last Monday, we talked about that. I think his name was David Schoen that was on doing that interview. And he was talking about the Bernie Sanders AOC rallies. And he goes, we don't care about principle. We just want to win. And that goes exactly to what you were saying. It's not about policies. It's about the message that will go out there and sell their agenda so they can get in power. And then they do all these nefarious things. This is where people have to be really smart and pay attention and educated. And then we need to get activated and go to these rallies on the conservative side. And it's not, you know, when you talk to most people, including myself and you, we're conservative in most of the areas, and we're liberal in some other areas. And that's the message that needs to go out there, because those all go back to our constitutional principles and the protections we have.
Yeah, and the thing is, we know that one thing about the Democrats, and I'm talking about the party apparatus, they're never going to stop. They're never going to give up. They're going to keep going. And as I always say, we got to man the political ramparts. If we don't, we're going to have to man the real ones again. And that price has been paid. And that would be a dadgum shame if we had to do that. A couple of the comments I thought I'd read. These are comments.
Yeah, I wanted to hear those. I didn't read
podcast. One of them said, Mr. Carville, you're not going to beat Republicans with some of these lame ass Democrats, like you just said, or you alluded to. Why can't you see this? David Hogue is correct. And then one pro Carville one said, I wish James brought up the fact that 7 out of 11 candidates endorsed by Hogue's PAC last year lost. Now, the vast majority of the comments were very pro David Hogue, and there were a number of them that were Carville's age and stuff that actually were siding with Hogue. So, it's unscientific, but based on what I was looking at, there truly is a civil war going on in the Democratic Party.
There really is. We'll see what emerges. The way it's going to be more left and more liberal and more communist. You went to a communist rally in Gainesville yesterday and went all over the nation. That's not who we are as Americans. We're a constitutional republic. And for the people that are educated, they understand that and they'll fight to preserve that.
Yeah. We've got, as old Benny Franklin said, he gave us a republic if we can keep it. That's why you.
I was in Thailand and they're talking about having open elections and doing that. And there was a lot of, angst in the populace while we were there. And somebody asked me, he goes, do you like a democracy? I says, yeah. I said, it's messy, but it's worth it. It is ugly. If you look at American politics, it is ugly, but it's worth it. And it's worth fighting for because it gives you the freedoms we have.
Absolutely. And we realize that people have the freedom to watch whatever they want to watch. We appreciate you looking at our show and watching it. Please comment on Facebook or wherever you're watching it. We'll try to respond to them as quickly as possible and spread the word for us. We really need your help. Any closing thoughts, Ted?
No, I just, the more you read and you see what's going on, the more you feel blessed to live in this country. And, you know, you got to rally around the president and his agenda, because this is moving our country to fiscal responsibility and you know, the protections of our borders and all that. And as he said in his State of the Union address, it's going to be ugly. We're going to go through some tough times. I'd rather go them through now voluntarily than have them forced on us by a conflict or the country going broke. And nobody wants that. And let's all rally together as Americans and make this country come out of this stronger.
Absolutely. What he said. So I hope you've enjoyed the show as much as we've enjoyed bringing it to you. Please like what we're doing, share it far and wide, but above all, have a blessed and joyous week.